Peace, family, peace, and welcome back to The Black Opinion. This show is the presidential candidate special. So what we're going to be doing today is we are going to be going into the presidential candidates. Also going to be going into the current president. We're going to be looking at Kamala Harris. We're going to be looking at Joe Biden and their policies, things that surround them. I've obviously got my partner in crime here, Big Bro, and he's going to give his opinion on the current president and the presidential candidates. I think this is a good one because a lot of people probably going to think that the UK politics doesn't have a lot to do with US. I personally think it does. I think that a lot of the times stuff that happens in the US, you know, kind of floats over to the UK and we get it here. So, you know, there's probably going to be a lot of people saying, why do a US political debate? But I think it's needed. Why do you think we need it, Big Bro?
I think we need it for a multitude of reasons. Firstly, there's a type of cultural imperialism that, as I said, bleeds over to many different parts of the world. You know, what with the influence of Hollywood, the influence of music culture, and just recently we've seen in the influence of George Floyd and issues of that kind, and it's almost as if we're living in an interconnected world now. And so once upon a time, America may well have seemed like another country, and now it just seems like it's another neighborhood. And I would say as such that what America does has a profound effect on what happens within, I was going to say for a moment within the EU, but you know, within the EU and the UK, and literally all over the world. And so I think it would be prudent when we look at, say for example, America and what is happening, we take some time to study what's happening and study also what we believe will be the effect of the election which is coming up, because to my mind, this presidential campaign literally, this is not hyperbole, this could literally shape politics in the world for the next 20, 30 years.
You think it's that serious?
Well, I do, because essentially there are two vastly different pictures which are being drawn at the moment between the so-called Republicans and the so-called Democrats.
Why did you say so-called?
Well, I'm going to tell you the reason why I say so-called, because clearly the Democratic Party that we see today has moved very far to the left of what you would recognize as, say, for example, a JFK Democrat. And there are certain aspects of the Republican Party which have also taken up extreme views.
So are you saying they're coming more, they're looking more like one party now? Or?
No, I think they're looking at two very different parties.
Very different parties.
But extreme views are being taken.
Extreme on the right and extreme on the left.
What is happening with the Democratic Party is quite astonishing. I'll give you an example. A couple of days ago, Bernie Grant, God bless Bernie Grant. Bernie Sanders, God bless Bernie Grant, wherever you are. Bernie Sanders made a statement which was quite interesting.
Many of the ideas we fought for that just a few years ago were considered radical are now mainstream.
He said that his views, which in 2015, 2016, which were seen as radical, are now the accepted doctrine now within the Democratic Party. And he wasn't lying. He was actually telling the truth. And there are many in the so-called Democratic Party that who at one time would have called themselves moderates and centrists. And there are no, I don't recognize any of them as centrists in that party. They've taken a position which, for me, because we're on the Black Opinion, I am in the first instance looking at it from a black perspective. And not to say that I'm not inclusive, because I am, but a black perspective first. And I believe that those policies are disastrous.
For black people?
For absolutely. These policies are disastrous for black people. And
in the Democratic Party, you're saying?
In the Democratic Party, they are disastrous for black people. And as we move on, I'm going to explain
All
why.
right, well, let's get onto that then. Let's get onto... Right, so there was a presidential, it was on CNN, there was a presidential debate.
Yeah.
And there was a senator on there called Senator Michael Bennett.
Michael Bennett, yeah.
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 And he said,
I believe you can draw a straight line from slavery through Jim Crow, through the banking and the redlining to the mass incarceration that we were talking about on this stage a few minutes ago. Thank you.
So, I want to talk about the prison reform,
Yeah.
right? It said that about 34% of the US prisons are filled with black men.
Yeah.
Now, has the current president, Donald Trump, done anything to help the black men in that prison system, or is Donald Trump continuing that said line that Senator Michael Bennett spoke about?
We see Michael Bennett made a good point, but it's not an original point that he made. I mean, if you read, for example, The Color of Law, Color of Law, the name of the author escapes me, but please go online and Google The Color of Law. It's a tremendous book. And it spoke about the intricacies of real racism. I'm talking about what you're hearing now. I'm talking about real racism in terms of finance, in terms of housing, and so on and so forth. It's an eye-opening book. I think that Senator Michael Bennett did make a good point, yeah, but it's a point that would have been better addressed at his colleagues within the Democratic Party. And I'll tell you the reason why. Your question was in two parts. The first point that I would raise is this. You mentioned, I'll come back to that in a moment, but you mentioned Donald Trump, and what has Donald Trump done?
What has he done?
Well, before I get to what Donald Trump has done and what he has led the Republican Party to do, because Donald Trump wasn't supported by the majority of the Republican Party when he spoke about, for example, the First Step Reform Act.
And finally, the law rolls back provisions of the 1994 Clinton crime law that was so devastating to so many and that disproportionately impacted the African American community. Nobody believes how much, and now they understand it.
In fact, what Donald Trump did, Donald Trump waited until the midterm elections and then introduced the First Step Reform Act because he knew that there were dissenters in the Republican Party who were against certain aspects of the First Step Reform Act. And so normally on these issues you would have bipartisan support, meaning that you would have support from both sides. And in this instance, it wasn't unanimous. The vote for the First Step Reform Act, I think it was 87 who were for and 12 who were against. Irrespective, Donald Trump got this act through. Now, the reason why it's important is this. In 1994, we had what was entitled the Clinton Crime Act bill.
Yeah.
Now, this bill was supported by his wife, Hillary Clinton. It was also supported by Joe Biden.
Is that different to the three strikes?
Well, I'm gonna explain it now.
Okay.
It was one of the most pernicious pieces of legislation ever thought up in American politics, and it was a direct attack, an assault on black people in America, but specifically black men. And it's not enough for me to say it; I've got to prove it with facts.
I was going to ask you why. Go on.
Well, I'm going to tell you the reason why. Firstly, if we look at, so the First Step Reform Act affects federal prisoners, people who have been sentenced under federal legislation. This is legislation which covers all of America, as opposed to state prisoners. Within those individual states, you can have individual interpretations of the law. There are some acts though which are federal. So, for example, murder of a police officer is a federal offence.
Yeah.
Rape is a federal offence.
Yeah.
And so you can look, for example, in 1994, when this particular law was brought out, the federal prisons held 95,162 prisoners. It's interesting that today, you had an explosion in the amount of people who were in prison. And I contend that the great majority of those who entered the prison systems were black men aged between the ages of 16 and 35. And today, the federal prisons hold 217,396.
So more than double.
Well, it's
Since
yeah,
94.
Since 1994. You must also understand this was planned for. So within that 1994 crime bill, which were what I call the Clinton crime bill, there was a provision for 9.7 billion. What for? For the expansion of the prison system.
Yeah.
And so essentially the American taxpayer were asked to fund a war essentially against black members of the public.
But isn't that because
yeah.
prisons became private business? So for me, if prison is a private business,
Yeah.
you're gonna need people, you need business, and you need a product.
No, we're talking about two separate things, because in the first instance, we're speaking about what the government are doing, and the government has injected 9.7 billion.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a statement of fact. Second part of it is this, perhaps how the question should have been couched. Do they have lobbyists in America? And the answer is yes, they do have lobbyists in America. Do these lobbyists sometimes seek partnerships with federal governments in terms of finance? Yes, they do.
Right.
And this is where the corruption comes in,
Right.
because you have the marriage of private enterprise, which I call corrupt private enterprise, with unethical government civil servants. This is essentially what's happened, because this figure didn't just come out of the air. It was very specific.
What, 9.7?
The 9.7 billion, which came out. So you mentioned the three strikes in the arm, but one of the most insidious pieces of this legislation was the introductions of the three strikes and you're out policy. Now, we don't want to go offhand because we're speaking about the First Step Reform Act,
Yeah,
but
I
I have to go back first,
Okay.
for you to understand why the First Step Reform Act had to come out,
Right.
and why is it that it was Trump that brought this legislation out,
Right.
and not Obama, not Biden, in fact, not even
Not Bush.
George Bush, previous to them. Everyone completely, in American politics, completely ignored this. Now, they brought out, for me, as I said to you, one of the very worst aspects of this particular legislation, which was the three strikes and you're out rule.
Right, yeah.
So let me explain this. Let's say, for example, you were held for a possession of a knife, and say, for example, it's a federal offense. Let's say that you had been done for weed before. On the third strike, and there are many different examples I can give you. In fact, there was one woman in North Carolina, and her third offense, she went in and stole literally $17 worth of groceries, and she was caught. She was sentenced to a mandatory life prison sentence.
For stealing $17 worth of groceries.
No, she was sentenced under the three strikes rule. So you may say, well, oh, look, it was only $17 worth of grocery. The fact is, the law had now been very, very clear, this pernicious piece of legislation, that you will now be sentenced to life in prison. So the thing is, the law itself was fundamentally flawed. The law was racist. It went against the spirit of justice, and it showed that those in power were, if they weren't racist, and I contend that this is racist, this was a racist piece of legislation, then they are ignorant and they should not be in the position that they were in.
So that was under Clinton.
This was under Clinton, and it was supported by Clinton's wife. In fact,
However,
let me just mention this
go
last
on.
point. It was very important to mention that in the wake of that, and when Hillary Clinton was questioned, we mentioned this previously on a previous,
What
she
she said.
referred to black people
As super predators.
as super predators. So this gave you the mindset of how they thought. Even if you look at Biden, who we're going to speak about a little bit later, with the busing and so on and so forth, and he came out and he was very clear that he didn't support busing because he didn't want his children raised in a racial jungle. The only reason why I point it out is to give you a flavor of what the prevailing wisdom and the prevailing language was at that time. And this is what we've got to be very careful of.
So before we get to the prison reform, so you went back to the Clinton era. We went to you spoke about 3 strikes. However, in America, I remember Clinton was described as black president, as the black people's president.
Well,
At the time, a lot of black people voted for Clinton, and a lot of black people loved Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
But I don't think, looking back on it, black people in America generally realized the policies that Bill Clinton was putting through that were going to adversely affect their lives.
Well, and this is why education is always very important. Education is very important, and I do remember people describing him ubiquitously as a black president, and I'd like to know.
He played the saxophone.
Well, apparently he played the saxophone, and you know, he had numerous relationships, and you know, he wasn't
smoked weed.
He smoked weed and wasn't faithful to his wife. So in the world we now live in, that qualifies you as black. But look, on a serious note, education is very, very important, and it's a hell of a thing when you can run roughshod over a community, and yet that community, because they're suffering from a political inertia, political ignorance, they can still vote for the person who would put them in that position. And what he did with that particular piece of legislation was literally destroy 2 generations of black Americans.
Black Americans.
And this is what he did. And you know, as I said to you, I find the act appalling, and I find him appalling.
So then let's come to, you know, Donald Trump now. So Clinton, let's say, messed up 2 generations of black men.
Yes.
Put them in prisons.
Yeah.
What has Donald Trump specifically done to help that?
Well, what Trump and his team have done is, as I said to you, brought forth what they call, this is the first stage of what's called the First Step Reform Act.
The more I met and spoke with those involved in our criminal justice system, the more clear it became that unfair sentencing rules were contributing to the cycle of poverty and crime like really nothing else before. It was time to fix this broken system, and it's a system of the past, and to improve the lives of so many people.
And there are certain provisions in this First Step Reform Act that I say will benefit prisoners, both black prisoners and poor prisoners within the United States. For example, they're looking at sentencing guidelines now. The sentencing guidelines, which were very varied before, have been brought closer. And so the distinction now between, the distinction that would be coming in between, say, for example, crack and crack cocaine would be very much closer now.
Right.
And one of the reasons why there was a differential.
There was a big one.
Well, there was a differential because crack was synonymous with black users, and cocaine was synonymous with your with your Ivy Leaguers in America. And of course, it would have been completely unacceptable for Ivy Leaguers to be getting the same sentences of people who lived in Brooklyn before gentrification or St. Louis.
So then why couldn't, if it took Donald Trump, a Republican, because black people in America have consistently for the past, 5 decades or less voted Democrat generally.
Yeah.
Why couldn't Obama do something like that, do you think?
Well, I mean, look.
The black president.
Look, let me say to you, I can only tell you about what's occurred. I think Obama would have to answer that himself. There are many questions that I would like to have, I would like to answer Obama. Perhaps this is not the right setting to do it. But before we even go to that, I wanted to speak very quickly about a woman by the name of Elizabeth Hinton.
Okay.
Now, Elizabeth Hinton, she was the assistant professor of history and African American studies, and she made a statement which was true in the light of these what I call governmental abuses in bringing forward this legislation, which I say harmed black people. And she pointed out that the Clinton administration knew that the criminal justice system was deeply unfair and biased against African Americans, and chose to expand that system. Now, the reason I pointed out to you is because this is open information, this is open source information in America. People like Obama, who was a professor, would have been aware of who Elizabeth Hinton was.
Right.
And Obama, not only did he not seek to rescind this legislation, but he actually came out and damned black men for their personal behavior in terms of family building, which did nobody any favors.
What do you mean? What did,
Well, I'll tell you what he did. He came out and he attacked black men as not fit for purpose. He said black women lead our community and black women are strong and black women. Nobody's not denying that. But I asked myself, how helpful was that? Where was the inward investment in black and poor communities from Obama? Genuinely, I didn't see it. You know, where was the growth? I didn't see it. Where were the jobs? I didn't see it. I didn't see it at all. It's not me knocking Obama. I'm telling you what I saw, and I have a great deal of facts and figures here to back up my point. You know, 37 pages full of facts and figures to back up my point. And so, all I'm saying is that the Elizabeth Hintons of the world, and there are many others who would have been brought to the attention of Obama. Obama, for one reason or another, decided that this was a hot potato, and he was not going to go for it. There were things that he did go for, fantastic for him, but I asked myself what actually benefited the black community, because you see, we're speaking about a presidential debate and we're looking at the pluses and minuses of the incumbent president, you know, his VP, and we're going to be looking at Biden and Kamala. And at the end of the day, this comes down to policy. Yeah, not emotion, just the policy.
I was going to get into that.
Well, and then I'll stop talking and then you can get into it.
Because looking back on both President Clinton and President Obama, black people voted en masse for both of them.
Yes.
I believe that black people voted for Obama and Clinton based off of character, not of policy. They liked the person's character, as in the way they came across on TV, you know, the way they came across in interviews, how they spoke to people. Now, you and I have had a conversation about bosses and people that run corporations. Now, that's not to say that bosses and, you know, people that run corporations can't be quote unquote nice people. But when it comes to Donald Trump, people say, oh, I don't like him. Don't like his character. A lot of black people say, oh, I don't like his character. I don't like the way he does that or the way he says that. However, it seems to me that the people in the past, both Clinton and Obama, who had quote unquote good character towards black people, have done more to adversely affect the lives of black people than the person that black people don't currently like, Donald Trump, has.
Well, look, that's an interesting point, and I'll come out and I'll say from the get-go that there are aspects of Donald Trump's personality that can rub people up the wrong way. You know, I find him brusque, I find him obnoxious from time to time. I think he's incredibly rude. I think he's very, very brittle. Yeah, it's very, very touchy. I think he's incredibly vengeful as a leader. But then I ask myself, since one of those bad traits in a leader, what is it you think a leader does? Who do you think? Who do you want going into bat for you when you're dealing with a Xi Jinping?
Or a Kim Jong-un.
Or Kim Jong-un. Or a Vladimir Putin. Or dealing with the incendiary situation within the Middle East. Sorry, and excuse my language, you want a son of a bitch who will be going in to bat on your behalf. I think one of the problems with Donald Trump and the way in which people view him is that Donald Trump believes in the nation state, and we're in a world whereby people more believe in internationalism.
Yeah, they think it's an international thing.
They believe in internationalism, but Trump understands at a core level, I'm the American president and I will be fighting for America first. This sometimes throws his opponents, and they will accuse him of not caring or vicious or he's some of that may be true. I don't know. I just think to myself, if a man, for example, is a president and he has 22 million people who have come into his country illegally, imagine that's a third of the population of the UK that would have entered that country immediately. What do you do as a leader? Do you sit down and do what you've always done, or do you put the pressure on? Well, we've seen both of Obama, the Bushes, the Clintons, and so on, way back, they were not effective. So Trump ran on a policy, look, I'm going to build a wall. But also when the quote unquote caravans were coming through Central America and the Mexicans were allowing them in, Trump then stepped up the game, and said that he's going to be imposing tariffs on the Mexicans. And not only that the tariffs would be in 3 phases. Let me just say to you, very quickly, in one weekend, the Mexican car industry lost over 16 billion of their share prices. And guess what happened? Those same corporate monsters put pressure on the Mexican government, and the Mexican government sent 4,000 or 5,000 troops to the border. Hey presto, the caravan stopped, and the illegal immigration was a trickle. But of course, many people didn't like the way in which Trump did that. And so I ask the question again, what do you think a leader does?
But this is the thing I've noticed generally about people who are not leaders, right? And I guess you and I are leaders to some degree, I guess within our own families or stuff like that. A lot of the time, leaders have to make the decisions that other people cannot make. A lot of people don't understand the pressure that is on a leader's shoulders, and a lot of people just cannot bring themselves to do the things that must be done. So when I see people like Vladimir Putin, like people like Donald Trump, people like Kim Jong-un, as much as I may have an opinion on what they do, there's a part of me that says, you know what, Sarah, you don't know what that's like. You don't. I don't know what it's like to say, okay, cool, this button here does this, and it's gonna affect a lot of people, but you know what, it has to be done, and people are gonna not like it.
It's also perception as well, because many of us, through what I call that whole cultural imperialism, we've been given a view of what the president is. The president's dashing, the president's calm under pressure.
Says, yeah.
The president's 6'4" and 180 pounds. With Trump breaks the mold on that. Trump is not a professional politician.
He's a businessman.
But he is a businessman, and Trump is in the White House because the Americans got to a stage whereby they didn't want any more of that. You understand? They didn't want, for example, they were fed up of an Obama who looked fantastic, wore his suits really well, read off of an auto cue and said all the things that his PR people and his speechwriters gave him to say. Trump came in and said, look, as far as I'm concerned, we've got one of the highest corporation tax levies in the world. It's at 35%. He says, I want to reduce it to 15%. Everybody rose their hands. Oh my God, how can you say this? This is a boost and a fillip to your friends in corporate society. Trump came in. Not only did he give tax cuts to the Americans, but he reduced corporation tax from 35% to 21%.
And he did that, I think, because he's a businessman.
Well, no, it was a little bit more than that, because what Trump was looking to do was to stimulate the American economy and bring much of the monies which American corporations have offshore and bring it back into America in order to use those monies to help stimulate the economy. And what he also did, he took a huge sword to the red tape that was strangling business, manufacturing, and so on and so forth in America. Now, if you remember during the last election, I remember President Obama said that when Donald Trump speaks of jobs, he says, where are they going to come from? He said, what, does he have a magic wand? And, my heart sank when he said that, because that's not your job as president. Your job is to give solutions.
The jobs that are coming in now, because some of those jobs of the past are just not going to come back. And when somebody says, like the person you just mentioned, who I'm not going to advertise for, that he's going to bring all these jobs back. Well, how exactly are you going to do that? What are you going to do? There's no answer to it. He just says, well, I'm going to negotiate a better deal. Well, how exactly are you going to negotiate that? What magic wand do you have? And usually the answer is he doesn't have an answer.
Yeah, as a president, your job is not to jump in the quagmire with the people. So we're sad. Well, I'm sad as well. We don't have no jobs. Well, what are you asking me for?
Yeah,
you know, that's not the job of a president. And so he brought in swinging regulation cuts in order to stimulate the American economy. He also looked at China, for example, and he said that China has been engaged in IP theft for a very long time, stealing American intellectual property. He also knew that the Chinese would, when it suited them, devalue their currency, putting greater pressure on American exporters, completely destroying the farmers in America. Trump has put tariffs on the Chinese, and he's redirected a lot of that money back to farmers in America. So I'm saying that do I think that Trump is an ethical man? It depends on how we would describe someone being ethical. Yeah. If you ask me, is he being effective? I would say yes, he's being effective. And sometimes with Trump, you look at him, you hold your nose, but you say to yourself, is he batting on behalf of America and American interests? I don't think that's in question.
All right, so let's go back to what the senator said.
Yeah.
What's his name? Steve Bennett.
Bennett
said before. Now he said.
But you know what other line I can draw? 88% of the people in our prisons dropped out of high school. Let's fix our school system, and maybe we could fix the prison pipeline that we have.
Thank you, Senator Bennett.
It seems as if school choice and schooling in America is going to be a big thing during this campaign. What do you think?
Well, look, I'm going to, and this is where the Democrats are missing a trick. I think that school choice for the great majority of Americans, especially Black Americans, poor Americans, Latino Americans, they're going to be voting for their children's future. And I think that school choice is perhaps the most important issue. I have a wonderful friend of mine who's an educator, real dear friend to me, and she's always pointed out that she really dislikes the way in which Trump speaks, and he doesn't put his point over. And I remember her saying to me, she said, why doesn't Trump, for example, come out and say, for too long, Black and poor families have been denied choice on schools. They're forced to send their children to schools which are failing or failed completely. And I think she's right. Donald Trump is missing a trick also in terms of how he puts this particular policy over. Look, American schools where Black children are concerned have completely failed. There are, just for want of time, I won't go into it, but there's a whole host of schools. Yeah, there are a whole host of schools from Baltimore, Chicago, St. Louis, Illinois, Florida, whereby Black children are coming out functionally illiterate after so many years in school. And then you juxtapose those results, and then you look at who is controlling politics in those particular areas, fiefdoms.
Are they normally Democrats?
And they are absolutely 100% exclusively Democrat. And sometimes, I call it like the bigotry of low expectations. Because they are Black, because they are poor, then we do not have any real expected outcome for them. This is also quite racist. Yeah, it's racist and it's derogatory. Do you understand? And it ties into the very worst stereotypes about Black people, almost like my friend said, almost over here, for example, people want to teach Stormzy. They don't want to teach Mozart. They understand whereby Mozart and the story behind Mozart is very, very important, which is why the music lives today. I just find that the Democrats have missed a great opportunity. Now look, you have people like Betsy Voss, Senator Tim Scott.
My grandfather's 99th birthday would have been tomorrow. Growing up, he had to cross the street if a white person was coming. He suffered the indignity of being forced out of school as a third grader to pick cotton, and he never learned to read or write. Yet, he lived long enough to see his grandson become the first African American to be elected to both the United States House and the United States Senate in the history of this country. Our family went from cotton to Congress in one lifetime. And that's why I believe the next American century can be better than the last.
And others are helping to introduce a system which will allow every family in America to choose a school which is best for them, whether they're rich or poor, black or white, Hispanic or whatever. And, will the unions like it? No, of course they won't. And why is that? Because effectively you're wresting control out of their hands and putting control in the hands of parents. Now, many schools have been allowed to pump out a diet of very, very poor education. But there is no punishment for what they do. There is no comeback because the unions are so powerful. And I think that what President Trump has done in seeking to introduce this legislation is effectively empower parents. And I cannot see the downside in allowing that to happen. When you have literally where 2, 3, 4 generations in of people who have not for one reason or another been able to access an education system or an education system that will benefit them. You've got to look at that system, and even though it's the old cliche, if you do something blah 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 blah, then you'll get the same result. The fact is, even though it sounds like a cliche, and it is, in this circumstances, it's actually true. And so I think that school choice is going to be a battleground in this election, and the fact that the Democrats are effectively against it, I think they're going to be in huge trouble. I mean, you cannot run an election devoid of policies, and your one effective policy is that vote for Biden because he's not Trump. It's nonsense.